Libya remains a mess. The country continues to grapple with civil war, humanitarian crises, foreign interventions, and the threat from ISIL. This week, a panel of UN experts said a political solution in Libya remains out of reach in the near future. So, looking back, was the NATO intervention in 2011 to topple Colonel Gaddafi in the midst of the Arab Spring a mistake? Will continued foreign intervention from outside powers bring more harm than good? And who's to blame for the violence and chaos on the ground that's produced such a massive refugee crisis? Joining me to debate this are Hafed Al-Ghwell, columnist at Arab News and former senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., and Mustafa Abushagur, former Deputy Prime Minister of post-Gaddafi Libya. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. Mustafa, given how many problems Libya has right now, political, economic, social, security, do you have any regrets about supporting that original NATO-led intervention in your country in 2011 to topple Gaddafi?
I think we are very expectations are much higher than they should be, because when you have people they lived under 42 years of oppression, you don't expect those people to be able to make it directly and to become a democratic society in a few months. And that's what has happened. So what is going on today is really we are paying for the legacy of the regime.
So no regrets about 2011?
No, I do not. Because really, if the intervention had happened, Libyans could have been killed thousands and thousands on the hands of Gaddafi.
Hafed, you were an opponent of Gaddafi for a long time. Where do you stand on the intervention? Was it a mistake to get rid of Gaddafi in the way that he was got rid of and everything we've seen since?
I think it is a huge mistake, and I think both Libyans and the world is paying for it consistently. I disagree with Mustafa on several issues. One is that talking about, and I was one of the opposition, talking about his intolerance of any opposition was quite long time ago in terms of history. It was in the late 70s and the 80s. We also, and the world all, can attest to this, that Gaddafi's policies have changed dramatically over the last 10 years.
So just to be clear, for the sake of our viewers, you're saying that Gaddafi, who was a brutal dictator, brutalized his people for several decades, Libya would be better off if he was still in power today?
Without a question, because because it was a civil war between two sides of Libya in 2011. There were and still are significant tribal presence that is in support of Gaddafi and still loyal to him. The fact that NATO and Europe intervened on behalf of one side against another does not make it a revolution.
Mustafa, it wasn't a revolution because it was a civil war and outside powers.
No, it was a revolution, definitely, because those people who they went to the streets in Benghazi at the beginning, and then in Tripoli and other cities there, really they're coming out really against the oppression that they have lived under, and the tyranny they have lived under for many, many years. I think the intervention by the United Nations through NATO is really to save the Libyan lives. And the intervention really happened because of that.
When Hafed said that Libya would be better off today under Gaddafi, as someone who was in the post-Gaddafi government, what's your response to him?
No, it's not. I mean, clearly, from one aspect, you can say it is better off, because people, they were living under oppression. Yeah, maybe there is some security, but security that serves Gaddafi himself, not the Libyan people. But now, really, we have taken several steps towards making the place better. But again, yes, I mean, security is not great in Libya now. It is improving slowly, but it's not ideal in that sense. But also at the same time, Libyans have taken some steps that do not go back under that. They were able to do some real elections that have taken place.
You say not great, not ideal. Some might say you're kind of underplaying how bad the situation is on the ground. No, you have dozens of different militia groups in different cities competing for power. Yeah. You have ISIL turning up for a while, running one of your cities.
But this is the making of Gaddafi himself. He is the one who took these criminals out of the prison, 17,000 of them. He is the one who distributed weapons to everybody because he wanted to make sure.
So let Hafed respond to that then. This is the legacy of Gaddafi. It's easy to blame the outsiders.
No. It's what Gaddafi did 7 years ago, we're coming up on 8, cannot be blamed for infinity. Not
infinity, but Mustafa said 4 decades he was in power for. Yes. It's only been 7 years. In the grand scheme of history, it's not that long a time to recover.
I'm not defending Gaddafi, but the same argument that they used to blame Gaddafi can be used today to blame what happened in the last 7 years.
So let me ask, so let's put that to Mustafa. How have things improved for ordinary Libyans? Because Hafed is disputing.
No, I mean, it is clearly people are far more free to express their opinions today.
I am not. I'm still threatened while I am in the United States. If I go to Libya, I'll disappear within 24 hours.
During 30 years of Gaddafi regime, if I stepped inside the country, I would have been hanged in the streets. So that's not the issue.
I did not go to Libya for 31 years, Mustafa. So I know that. But to answer your question completely, I am against Gaddafi. But once you have a government that is reforming and moving in the right direction, it doesn't take a brain surgeon. It's not Gaddafi who did it. It was the system around him that was improving and moving to the right direction. So 7 years would have been enough to see some results. But what we did is we spent the last 7 years...
Let Mustafa come in. I asked him earlier, Mustafa, what are the results? He keeps challenging you, saying everything's worse now. You were deputy prime minister in a post-war government. You supported the intervention in the war.
I did.
Tell your fellow Libyan what's better in Libya today. What are the results?
What is better in Libya today is that, first of all, Libyan people, they start enjoying some of their freedoms. Yes, it is the conditions that we have today. It is a legacy. When Gaddafi was toppled, there was no institutions in the country to be able to carry on.
Mustafa, you were kidnapped by a militia. You yourself were kidnapped by a militia.
That's true.
They disagreed with your policy. How much security and freedom of speech does that reflect?
No, that's true. I mean, I have been kidnapped, but that's irrelevant to this case here.
He's kidnapped by a militia and he still thinks it's a better off place. That's at least his devotion to the cause.
No, it is, because really, I have been against Gaddafi for 30-some years, okay? And the changes that Gaddafi did at the end, they were not genuine, because really they were targeted to lay the ground for his children to rule the government for the next 50 years. The only army there, it's militias of his children. They are not, there is no real Libyan army that he left for us.
The irony is
no
that if Saif runs today for election,
Saif Gaddafi.
Saif Gaddafi. If he runs today for election, all probability is he will win.
You have no evidence for that. What's your evidence for that claim?
But if you monitor, for example, the social media,
a lot of people in Libya watching this show might say it's easy for you to say that saying in the US. For us, it was a horrible life living under a dictator. It's better Gaddafi's gone.
Let me ask every Libyan, are they today better off security, economically, politically, even if
that's what we're trying to debate today. Is that the legacy of Gaddafi, or is that the fault of the people who came after Gaddafi?
I think it is the fault of the people who led this uprising. A lot of them were from the Gaddafi regime themselves. Mahmoud Jibril, Mustafa Abushagur, among other, Ali al-Isawi. All of these guys, they are the ones who did not put Libya on the right direction. I think
you made it, but let Mustafa come in.
First of all, those people, why they are doing that? Because these institutions, they were oppressing them for so long. And when the Arab Revolution started, clearly they find, maybe they can do this.
Let me move the conversation on. Let me ask you this. Outside powers have played a big role in Libya. Both the original Western-led intervention, NATO, the United States, Britain, France, but also today, Qatar, Egypt, the UAE, taking sides, different militias, funding and arming different groups. What's the solution to that?
What it is that the intervention from those countries really is the one which is causing these problems what's going on. I mean, you see it.
So when you were deputy prime minister, what did you tell those countries?
No, at that time it was very different. I was there in the first year.
So you never took support from any outside countries?
No, not really.
None.
Never did. And at that time it was I'd say the much better time, because really there was some progress has been taking place. Unfortunately, I think what happens later on, when the country becoming stable, those countries clearly they have different agendas for it, because first of all they want to end anything called the Arab revolutions, because those regimes in these countries, they are dictators and they are afraid of a country which can be democratic, can be prosperous, and also wealthy, which is Libya. So they have done everything to support.
Or they might be afraid that look what happens when a dictator falls, it turns into a mess. We don't want that in our country. You're not exactly a great ad for the Arab Spring, Libya.
They are the ones who they have contributed to this mess, and they're still funding it today. I mean, if you look at...
Surely you would concede that point, Hafed. If Libya were left to the Libyans, to your fellow Libyan people, it would be in a much better place. Again, you're giving a pass to other people who've caused problems.
Two things. One is, yes, these countries have never interfered with the Libyan government directly, but the problem is they've always interfered with militias that...
So all I'm asking is, if they didn't interfere, wouldn't Libya be in a better place?
I want to make my second point. You cannot blame other countries. I mean, this is the problem with all the supporters of this. They blame Gaddafi. They blame foreigners. They blame Qatar and the UAE and others. They blame the failure of the UN. You cannot build a state or a country on that basis. You have to take responsibility and realize that the failure, the fundamental failure is Libya.
Okay, hold on, but that's good rhetoric, but you yourself are admitting that outside countries are supporting different militias. The President of the United States, former Barack Obama, has admitted on the record, one of my greatest mistakes, if not the biggest mistake, was not planning for the aftermath in Libya.
Precisely.
Had the US planned better, had outside powers stayed out, wouldn't Libya be in a better place today?
It's not their job, sorry.
Well, they're the ones who've caused the war.
No, they came a month
now
later.
they're propelling the violence.
No, from their point of view, they're supporting their own interest and supporting. That happened everywhere, in Lebanon, in Iraq, everywhere. The naivety of saying for a political leadership that we are blaming everybody else instead of taking our own initiatives to build a state. Is nonsensical.
Mustafa, if you are blaming outside powers, doesn't that mean basically Libya will be messed up for a long time to come? Because those outside powers aren't going anywhere.
No, I mean, partially,
so what are you going to do about it?
No, I mean, partially I'm blaming the outside world, but clearly we as Libyans we should be responsible for this. And this is the problem that we have. When people live under dictatorship for 40 years, they have no room for dialogue. There is no room for any other opinion. This is what you have. You have people who they have this culture, the culture of oppression, and they find themselves in a position now, they are not willing to talk to one another.
It's interesting you mentioned culture. A lot of people in the West have this view of Arabs can't do democracy or you need to have a strongman culture. And in a country like Libya, it doesn't help that there's this guy, Khalifa Haftar, former general, who's now running a bunch of militias, who was accused of being a former CIA asset, accused of being an Emirati asset, accused of war crimes. He seems to have a lot of power and influence in a section of the country. Is that where Libya is heading back towards? The arms of another dictator, another general, another colonel?
I think Libyans, they would never accept another dictator. They would never accept another military rule. Of course, Mr. Khalifa Haftar that you mentioned, he was supported by Egyptians and the Emiratis, by money and weapons, because they want to make sure that this revolution will never get out of there.
So what do you do about someone like him who has that much power?
Clearly has to be contained. Right now there is the United Nations going for an election for the end of this year. And
you mentioned the United Nations. This week, a panel of UN experts said, and I quote, "A political solution in Libya remains out of reach in the near future." Do you disagree with them?
I read it, and I partially agree with them. Yes, that would be very difficult for us to be able to get out of this mess, because we Libyans have to realize that this opportunity, it is a lifetime opportunity for the country to be able to take it forward. And I think we are responsible for getting together and being able to reconcile, be able to build the country. And of course, we expect from the international community to stop.
For a population to remain silent for 42 years does not mean that they don't take a blame. The focus has to be for any statesman to move the country forward. The idea that
Are you an optimist about the future?
No, I am not, because even the election nonsense. Libya had a number of elections. It produced nothing but division. You and I know that sometimes elections in these kind of mess and these kind of societies that don't have any institutions create civil wars.
Last word to Mustafa. Are you an optimist?
Yes, I am. I look at what's going on is a natural progression that unfortunately we go through. I was in Libya. I'm in Libya 3 weeks ago. I was there. And I was driving throughout the whole city of Tripoli. As a matter of fact, there is a lot of improvement security-wise. When I go there to visit, then I'll let you know that it is secure.
Okay. Why don't you both arrange a joint visit? We'll have to leave it there.
I'll be glad to.
We're out of time. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront.